Welcome to Managing Students' Online Behavior, 3rd through 5th grade, Part 1, Expectations. This short webinar was developed by Albuquerque Public Schools Behavior Support Specialists. Your presenter today is Michaela Coffin, an Albuquerque Public School Behavior Support Specialist with 10 years of teaching and administration experience in grades K through 8. The purpose of this course is to provide a foundation upon which teachers can build a positive virtual classroom environment and respond to behaviors appropriately as needed by establishing expectations and systems of response. Just like in the physical classroom, the virtual classroom also needs expectations and boundaries. These have to be clearly communicated and frequently and consistently reinforced. More than likely, a lot of your expectations in your physical classroom can transfer over to the virtual setting. However, there may be some behaviors that you're seeing that wouldn't necessarily take place in a face-to-face classroom, but are taking place in your virtual online classroom. So questions to consider when establishing new expectations for the virtual setting might be, what do you want your virtual classroom to look and sound like? Have you communicated and retaught those expectations that do transfer over? And what aspects of distance learning require different expectations and boundaries in the physical classroom? Some of those things to consider might be your students' level of dress, background noise, different activities going on, and how students can limit distractions. For our 3rd through 5th graders, they may understand the difference between home learning and school learning, but they still may need to be reminded that showing up to class in their pajamas, even though they're at home, might not be necessarily appropriate. In addition, they may not understand how distracting the background noise or distractions can be to their learning and the learning of others, and setting those expectations is a good reminder for them. When it comes to expectations and boundaries, we have to remember that teaching is not the same as telling. Teaching requires that things are clearly communicated, thoroughly practiced, and consistently reinforced so that they become natural. Make sure that when you're working with expectations and behaviors in your classroom, that you've clearly communicated what you expect to see and that you give students the opportunity to practice those expectations while reinforcing and giving specific feedback about their behavior. Some example expectations that you might want to use in your classroom are things like making sure that students know that you're ready when you can see their faces and shoulders inside the video box. Making sure that their mics are muted when they enter the meeting and they're not speaking so that you can clearly hear everybody. Saving snacks, toys, games, and pets until the appropriate time to share. Or how they need to use brain breaks or bathroom breaks. In addition to your expectations and making sure that those are clearly communicated, positive reinforcement systems are a vital part of your virtual and your face-to-face classroom. Reinforcing students for following expectations is going to help them internalize them and perform the desired behaviors. So, if you had a positive reinforcement system in your physical classroom, the best thing to do is to adapt that to the virtual classroom. Your incentives or what you do in response to students' positive behavior may have to change because you're not face-to-face, but the system itself can still be used. If you need to build a positive reinforcement system for your virtual classroom, or you need to alter it, here are some things to consider. Maybe a point system, like Class Dojo would work, or just tallying points for different groups of students or individual students. Make sure that you use immediate behavior-specific praise or feedback and to use it frequently. This is going to let children know that their behavior is seen and appreciated. Maybe you can incorporate using fun Google extensions. There are a bunch of them out there with different filters and things that show up on the screen that can be used to incentivize students. Maybe you go old school and send snail mail or postcards for achievements and points earned. This helps build relationships with your students, and it's a great way to connect with families. Finally, Maybe they earn some virtual fun activities like a Friday virtual dance party, similar to like a Friday fun day. This is a great opportunity for you to survey your students and figure out what they would like. Let's talk about behavior-specific praise. Behavior-specific praise is just that. It's very specific to the behavior that you're seeing, and you're praising the student for performing that behavior. When you're giving behavior-specific praise, you want to name the behaviors that you observe, not necessarily how you feel about it. We want to be very, very clear to students with what they're doing and how it's benefiting the entire class. So things like, thank you, Susie, for keeping your mic off. It's allowing the rest of your classmates to learn. Or, thank you, Johnny, for focusing and using the chat appropriately to discuss the topics in the lesson. Things like that are going to give good feedback to your students about what they're doing, and it's going to make them feel good and build that virtual classroom community. It's a good idea, though, too, with behavior-specific praise to avoid always naming the same students as your examples for others. Make sure to, in a way, spread the wealth so that everyone feels seen. The counterpart to a positive reinforcement system is the gradual system of response. Doug Lemov teaches us that the key to delivering consequences is developing a scaled system of incrementally larger consequences that you can deliver reliably, fairly, and without hesitation. A gradual system of response is very important, especially in a virtual setting when your options of administration intervention are limited. This system of response is for when students are not following behavior expectations and consequences need to come into play. We use this graduated system so that, in a way, the punishment fits the crime. So as the severity of the behavior increases, so does the severity of the consequence. When you're building your gradual system of response, if you don't already have one, questions like what behaviors do you anticipate? What are your consequence options? What things that you can give as consequences that are easy to follow through with and manage? And how are you going to communicate this system to students and caregivers are very important. In the virtual setting, like we mentioned previously, when you don't have the options of administration or things like taking away recess minutes or anything like that, we have to get a little creative. So here's an example flowchart of a gradual system of response for the virtual setting. First, you might start off by either reinforcing the appropriate behavior using behavior-specific praise, or by pausing and reminding students of the established expectations in a calm, non-emotional tone, making sure that you state the behavior that you want to see. This is just like a verbal warning without drawing specific attention to the student to embarrass them. If the behavior continues, you may have to go to a calm, specific verbal warning or redirection. So maybe Susie's using the chat to talk about Fortnite instead of your lesson on fractions. So a specific verbal warning or redirection might be, Susie, I see that you're using the chat to talk about Fortnite. Please return your focus to the lesson activity by using the chat to discuss these equivalent fractions. Hopefully at this point, Susie will stop using the chat inappropriately and start participating in the lesson. However, if she does not comply, a structured choice is a good next option. Structured choice, just like in the physical classroom, you need to kind of practice ahead of time, making sure that you know what options you'll give to your students and practicing that before the behavior arises. In addition, with whatever options you give your students, make sure that the students know what each option entails. So for example, Susie, you can either mute your mic and take a 2-minute refocus break, or you meet with me after class. Make sure that Susie knows how to take a 2-minute refocus break if that's the choice she takes. Make sure that students know how to use a timer. Make sure that students actually come back after that break. Finally, if a student's behavior escalates or even begins at a point where they should not be staying in a virtual setting until their behavior is addressed outside of it, you can remove the student from the class. If you're using Google Meet with your class, though, remember this is limited and that students actually can come back in without your control. If a student's behavior warrants a removal from the class, make sure that you contact caregivers and/or your administrators in addition to removing the student. Make sure that there's a follow-up meeting with the child. This conversation should be focused on repairing and maintaining a positive relationship and preparing for success for the next meeting. So going back over expectations, talking to caregivers. Parent contact and keeping your administrators aware of any issues that you're having are incredibly important. It may get to the point where you have to have an outside meeting with the student, the parents, and your administration, much like a virtual parent-teacher conference. This is just an example of a gradual system of response that could work in the virtual setting. These options may change depending on your specific school site and class. If you're having trouble coming up with different consequences that you can use, maybe reaching out to your colleagues or your administration for ideas is recommended. Finally, let's touch base about the teacher and caregiver team. In the virtual setting, a lot of your behaviors that are happening at home with the student can be addressed by having clear communication with their caregiver. This requires a new level of cooperation so that students can continue learning and building relationships with their class from afar. The teacher-caregiver relationship is going to be incredibly vital. So, in order to build these relationships, some things you might consider doing are clearly explaining your expectations, positive reinforcement system, and gradual system of response to the child's caregivers. Maybe send them an outline of what each plan entails. This way, everyone's on the same page about what's expected and what will happen if a student does not comply with those expectations. Next, maybe help the caregiver establish a productive environment for their student by giving them ideas for how they can do that. A lot of parents and caregivers are stressed out right now because they may be working from home and there are multiple children trying to do multiple things for school. Next, make sure that you're communicating frequently about student behavior, both positive and negative, and the more positive, the better. Finally, help caregivers understand how to use online platforms and tools that their students are using. That way, a lot of behaviors that you may see because students are having issues with the online tools can be addressed by the caregiver in the home who can help the student since you are not able to, since you're from a distance. For those of you that are teachers in New Mexico or in possibly other states who have a mandatory reporting law, CYFD, or Children, Youth, and Families Department, requires that teachers, as mandatory reporters, report suspected abuse or neglect. In this new virtual learning setting, teachers may be seeing events happening in students' homes that call into question the student's safety. So specifically for our district, things like gang-related behaviors, gestures, use of illegal substances, nudity, adults forcing students to participate, or fighting in the background may be cause for concern and therefore a required mandatory report to CYFD. If you have questions about anything that you witness going on in a child's home, please reach out to your administrator for guidance in this. Finally, if you need support, we can help you. The Albuquerque Public Schools Behavior Support Team can help if you have a student who's making it difficult to teach, you're having class-wide behavioral issues, you need professional development or have specific questions, or if you just want to brainstorm new approaches to behavior and engagement. We can do this by setting up a one-on-one or small group Google Meet to discuss your needs. We can sit in on your online class with a microphone and camera off to observe student behaviors and provide feedback. We can discuss methods or provide resources via email, and we can also talk over the phone to determine next steps. For those of you within Albuquerque Public Schools, you can submit a ticket using the TLN ticket request or our email bss@aps.edu. If you're outside of Albuquerque Public Schools, you can connect with us via Twitter or our website.